So, hey everybody, we're going to get started today with auto layout components in Figma. We're going to kick it off by going into this page here. Remember that you can find this file that I'm working in at figma.com/@education. So you go to this page here and you can get a copy of auto layout components. I could see that 108 of you have already duplicated this file. So y'all are ready to ride along with me today. So a little bit about what auto layout is. So first off, you have to understand the problem associated with designing content and content layouts. Let's take a look at this Instagram style card. If I go to scale it horizontally, or if I scale it vertically, let's say I add in additional text, like I'm just copying and pasting that text. If there is no auto layout applied to this frame, it is not aware of its contents. The text and the imagery and the iconography is not responsive to the frame. Here, this is an auto layout component. This component is using auto layout. So then that way, when I resize this component left to right, you can see that this icon, that the width of this text is following the width of this component. We're going to talk in detail about all of the properties necessary to get this to work correctly. So here, I'm dragging this left and right. And now when I add in additional text, this component is set up. So then that way, that additional text will cause the component to expand. So this way, the contents that are inside are responsive to the width, right? So they're responding to their parent container, and vertically, this container is responsive to its text, and it's hugging that content and it's expanding out. So this is one of the reasons why you want to begin to use auto layout and to make components using auto layout, because it'll give you this superpower to make your components that make up your websites, that make up the app designs, to be much more responsive. All right, so let's start off at square one. Square one, we're going to create and remove auto layout frames. So what auto layout is, it's a frame around content that can either respond to that content, or it can be responsive to that content. So here, let's say I have some text. If we look here on the left in the layers panel, you'll see that it's just a text node. What I'm going to do is when I select that text node, I could do two things. Oops, I can also scroll off the page. There we go. I can select it and I can press Shift A. And when I press Shift A, you'll see this little toast. It says auto layout added. And you'll notice that this is now an auto layout frame. And when I look in the layers panel, you'll see that this icon is changed and that text node is now nested inside of this auto layout frame. So here, I'm just going to call this AL frame. And what this frame does is it has certain properties. You'll see underneath the frame, it says hug and hug. That means its width and its height are hugging the content that's inside, which is this text node. This text node is text that as I expand it, the frame will grow to fill it. Now let's see that frame a little bit better. I'm going to come over here to the properties panel on the right. I'm going to add a fill so we could see it show up. Let's make that green. And that fill is on the auto layout frame. Let's take a look at the auto layout properties. I can add padding on the left and right and padding on the top and bottom. And we could see that that text is inside. So as I write out more text, the frame around it now has padding all around it, and it has that background color, and it's going to expand to fill the width of the text. The reason it does that is because it has these resizing properties right here, and those properties are currently set to hug and hug. If I do anything to change that, if I drag and I change that width, notice the width now changes to like 217, and we'll see the property, the resizing property here on the right, it says fixed. It's no longer hugging whatever is inside of it. So we're going to set that back to hug, and you'll see that has fixed the auto layout resizing on that element. This is used to make things like buttons. So here we go. Let's say I have some text here. I'm actually just going to draw a rectangle. So I'm going to press the R key. I'm going to come up here in the top left corner. You see the shape tools, the rectangle. I'm going to draw that rectangle. I'm going to set that rectangle underneath the button text. There's a couple different ways to use it. You can use a shortcut key left bracket to send it all the way to the back. But I have this text. I have this rectangle. I can select them both. And now I can press Shift A. And Figma is like, oh, I see what you're trying to do. You want to make that an auto layout frame with that text inside. So here you can see right now it's called frame 16,000, right? We want to rename that. I'm going to name that button. And when we look here, we see that text that's inside. When we select the auto layout frame, we can see all of its properties here. So we can see that it has horizontal padding of 75. We could change that to like 20. And then we can see its vertical padding, and we could change that to like 24. And now we can control. Now, one other property that you might change is you might want to apply corner radius to the frame. We can select it. And once again, the auto layout is a frame. So we can change its frame property right here and just apply a bit of a corner radius. And now we have a button. And the benefit of this, once again, is that when we change that text, the surrounding frame is going to grow to fill that. So if I was to just draw a frame and give it some fill and put some text into it inside of that frame, otherwise I'd have to constantly resize it. If I change this text, and let's say I remove some, if I wasn't using auto layout, then I have to go in and have to rearrange things. And that can take a lot of time. Auto layout fundamentally is going to save you a ton of time so you can focus on more important design decisions as you are working on your layouts. So some keyboard shortcuts. Shift A is going to select whatever you have and wrap it inside of an auto layout frame. If you need to remove auto layout, you can use it's going to be Option or Alt key, Shift and A. That's going to remove auto layout. And if you need to remove a frame, it's going to be Command Shift G or Control Shift G if you're on Windows. So when you have auto layout elements, so let's say I have, here button 1, button 2, and I have button 3. So when I have these three things, let's make those consistent. Let's put a little lowercase there. Let's say I have these three items and I want them to be wrapped in an auto layout. So let's say I want to make a menu out of them. What I can do, I can select these three things, right? I can select them, and now I'm going to wrap them in auto layout. So each one of these little text fields are wrapped inside of an auto layout frame. Let's say I want to rename them because they don't have good names right now. I'm going to press Command R or Control R, and that's going to give me the opportunity to rename them. I'm just going to say button and put in button 3, 2, 1. There we go. Button 3, button 2, button 1. They're all named appropriately. So let's say I want them to be inside of an auto layout frame. And so I'm seeing a question, is there any relation with auto layout and CSS box model? Absolutely. When you have things in auto layout, you can actually inspect them in dev mode, and it will show you the corresponding padding values. It'll show you the corresponding flexbox values. So Marina, that is a great question, and I'll show you in just a moment. So now I can select these three items. I'm going to press Shift A, and when I press Shift A, they have now been put inside of an auto layout frame. I can name that as a menu. And we can see button 1, button 2, button 3. They're all in here. Now you'll see that they are currently a vertical layout. I can change them to a horizontal layout just as easily. So vertical or horizontal. And what's cool about this is if I want to rearrange them, I can select one. I can just use my arrow keys up and down, and I can move it up and down. So it's easy to rearrange the elements that you already have. So even as I begin to add additional text, let's say that this is vertical. If I go to horizontal, you'll see that the additional elements will grow to fill that space, right? So auto layout, those frames are going to give you a lot of capability. Here we go. We have 3, 2, 1. I'm going to select all three. I'm going to press Shift A. Now I want to control the spacing in between them. So spacing, just like padding, can be controlled. You'll see that property over here. So the vertical gap between the items, I could set it down to 24. You'll notice that there's no padding or horizontal or vertical padding, and that's fine. This is going to represent our items. Once again, I can select that second item. I can move that up, and you can see now I've rearranged those. So does auto layout automatically make it smaller? What if you want your rectangle to remain the same size? So it's a matter of how you want to apply it. So what I would say is adjust your padding correspondingly to how you want it to be. Figma is going to do its best to try to assume what it is that you're trying to do with it, and it's going to try to center it appropriately. But yeah, you're going to have control over it ultimately. So technically, you might just start with something like this, press Shift A, and then add in your margin and padding as separate options. And you could see here, just by hovering over it on the stage itself, on the canvas, you can have control over that padding. So yes, you have control over how you want to make those sizing. So once again, spacing and padding, when you start to make more complex elements, you're going to notice nested elements here. So here we have a row of elements, and then we have a column of elements. So this is 1, 2, 3, and then inside you can see that this is 1, 2, 3, 4 elements. Now the spacing and padding can all be controlled on stage. So I can adjust the padding here, and I could adjust the padding here. So all of that is going to be visually represented there. So working with the nested elements. All right. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about that resizing. And once again, just thinking of the concept of auto layout and its sort of relationship to your elements. So I mentioned that the container can respond to the content size. So I'm going to select this container. This is my card. You can see there's 3 elements inside of it. Right now it's set to a vertical auto layout. So they're stacking vertically. They have the spacing in between them. And you'll notice that the resizing of this card is set to hug and hug. That means the width and the height are going to grow based off of whatever's inside of it. So when I select the placeholder image inside, you'll see that it's actually growing the card in both directions. And when I edit this text, I'm just going to copy and paste the text. It's going to make the resulting area grow. So this is using the hug on the parent container that's causing the children to make it grow. Next, you want to think about the content is responding to the container size. So here we have a container, and the container's width and its height is set to a fixed value. And what that means is that me here, I'm controlling its width, and that width makes the content inside change. So if we were to go back to this original card, the width here is determining the size of this card. It's determining the placement of this ellipses menu. It's controlling that text itself. But then its vertical content, it's going to be the container responding. So you can mix and match these concepts based off of your designer intention. So here you'll see that as I reduce the size and as I reduce the height, the text and everything is all kind of receding in size. And that's because the resizing properties is the size of the text affected by the auto layout? Yes. In this example, this text field is currently set to a resizing value of fill and fill. So what it's doing is attempting to fill the container. So here, this is also set to fill, and this is also set to fill. and it can only be set to fill. And you can see that visual representation on the canvas. There's little red arrows that point in each one of those. So right here, those arrows are pointing in each direction. So when I select this text field, you'll see that it's filling based off of the parent container. So as I scale this up, you'll see that that text just kind of gets smaller, smaller, and it only has so much room to go. This text field has what is known as an additional property called truncate text. Truncate text can be set when you set the text field. You go down here to your type settings and you'll see truncate text. Truncate text, if I turn it off, you'll see that the text will just continue to move on. When truncate text is turned on, you'll get these ellipses that'll show that there's no room for the text to currently be placed in that space. And we're going to be talking about this type of resizing. So once again, when you're thinking about auto layout, there's two main concepts. The container is going to respond to whatever's inside, or whatever's inside is going to respond to the container. And as you're designing your elements or your design elements, your components, you're going to be thinking about these resizing values. So there's three types of resizing. There's fixed resizing where you determine the size. There's hug contents where it's basically going to grow or contract based off of whatever is inside. We're giving it a little hug. And as that content grows or recedes, the container is going to respond to it. And um, here you'll see that the contents that are inside have another resizing property that is known as fill container. So what that's going to do is attempt to fill the remaining size. So those are going to be the three main resizing types. And it's basically you're determining how you want your content to resize, whether or not the container or the inside elements are going to be responsive one way or the other. So I think somebody's asking if the font size can be reduced. So right now we are not reducing the font size, but what we are doing is reducing the width and the height. Okay, so thinking about that, you can have three items that are nested inside of another element. So here, this is a container that has three of these elements inside. So this container right now is kind of acting independently of the pieces that are inside. We can set each of those elements inside of this container to basically grow to fill the available space. So here we have the horizontal resizing, we have the vertical resizing, and I could set those all to fill. So then that container will grow to fill it. And that way you'll see how they grow. So once again, you can find these examples in this file, and I'll walk you through how that works with this example. So we're going to cover some resizing shortcuts, and we're going to cover this concept of resizing if you think of something as simple as this list item. So here, and I can reconstruct this for you as well. But what I want you to do is focus on the main content. So inside of this container, we have a list item. And inside of there, there's text and there's a little graphic. It's like a little arrow. And we have a container around it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw that out for y'all so you all can see it. So I'm going to press the R key. I'm going to draw out a rectangle. I'm going to put a stroke around the rectangle. Let's give it a 3-pixel stroke. So there we go. We can see that there. I'm going to add in some text. I'm going to press the T key. And let's create that list item text. And I'm going to create an arrow. So here, I'm just going to use the pen tool. The pen tool is up here. You'll see the pen tool. I'm going to draw a simple arrow. And I'm going to also make that 3 pixels. I'm going to take that arrow and put it inside of here. So what I'm going to do now I'm going to select these 3 elements. And with those 3 elements selected, I'm going to press Shift A. And so you'll see that auto layout has been added. Now, if we look at its construction in the layer panel, we could see here the list item. You could see here the arrow. Let's make sure we name that. When we're constructing components, when we're working with auto layout, we want to make sure we're naming our layers. So let's say that's arrow, and I'm going to call this list item menu button. Menu button. There we go. So now when I expand this out, right, this is auto layout, but we need to pay attention to its width. Its width is set to fixed, so that's why we see a number. Its vertical resizing is setting to hug, so that's why it's hugging these contents. So if I were to set this back to hug contents, it's going to condense to fill that content. And as asked earlier, you want control over that spacing. We can make that nice and even. I'll do 32, and the vertical ones will apply it at 16. So let's say I expand this, and the behavior that I want of this list item is that the arrow follows the right side, right? So this spacing here is what I want to basically grow up. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to that spacing, and we're going to set this to auto, right? So I set that to auto, and you can see that it grows to fill the available space, right? So here we go. We're growing to fill that available space. And so now when I resize this, the spacing is currently set to auto. That's basically filling in the gap between those elements. And this is what's allowing us to kind of grow and condense this. Okay. So another thing that we can do here, if I want to change how this is being applied, right? So these elements, I want to change how this is being applied. I can double click an edge, and it's going to change that to be hug, right? So it's going to reduce down that spacing, right? So if I make it large again, let's say I want to change that spacing, I can go in and I can type in auto. Okay. All right, cool. So now let's think about if we were to take these elements and put them into another container. When you're designing for web, when you're designing for apps, you're thinking about these containers and you're thinking about this parent-child relationship. In CSS, much of this is referred to as flexbox. So here, when I expand the width of this container, this is currently set to auto layout. If I want the elements inside to fill to expand, I just need to change their resizing. Remember, we talked about 3 types of resizing. There's fixed, there's fill, and there's hug. For the elements on the inside, we can only do fixed, or we could do fill to grow this out. So I'm going to show you a quick shortcut to select everything that's inside of a nested element. So once again here, I have here my purple menu container, right? So this purple menu container and these 3 list items, I'm going to select the menu container. I'm going to press enter. And what that does is it selects all of the elements inside. If I press that key that's just above enter on your keyboard, that's the backslash, you'll see that it goes and selects the parent. Enter, I select those children, and all of those children, I could change them all to fill container. And you can see that they're all set to fill container. I can easily do this as well. I can just double click. Oops, I'll show you here. I'm going to set these all to hug, right? So right now they're all hugging. But if I option or alt key double click on the elements, oh, is this not working? There we go. If I double click on those edges, it will cause them to swap from the hug to the fill. So they're all filling. And now I can select them all, and I could change that spacing to be auto. And what that's going to do, it's going to grow and fill that space in between. So somebody was asking about the CSS. We have dev mode now. When we have dev mode, we go in, we can actually see how this corresponds to CSS. So if you were to build this out, I can choose CSS code and I can actually see that relationship. So if you are teaching Figma alongside developers, or if you are interested in actually developing these concepts, you can see this represented right here. So I can see the padding, I can see this available spacing, I can see how this is constructed in dev mode. In order for your file to work, it must be in an education team for you to access dev mode so you can see this relationship. All right, so once again, you can see as I grow and shrink this element, those children are inside and they're going to grow to fill it. Okay, so a new concept. So if you've joined in on a previous auto layout workshop and we've talked about all of the previous concepts, there are some new concepts, newer concepts, new-ish concepts that are in Figma that give you also more control over your layouts. So you can apply a minimum width and height, and you can apply a maximum width and height. So let's say this element, I'm growing and shrinking it, but you might notice that when I shrink it down to this level, it doesn't look good. It's not usable. I'm just looking at this and I'm like, ew, I can't read this text. So what I can do here is I can select this and either on the children, so I can press enter, I can select the children, or I can press shift enter and I can select the parent, press enter and I can select the children. When I select those children, I can actually set a min width or a max width. And what that means is right now they are set to fill container. So this text field and that rectangle are just going to grow to fill that space however large it gets. I don't want that to happen. I want to have more control. I'm a designer, I'm a control freak. So, what I can do is I can select those elements that are inside and I can come here and for those widths, I can set maximum width values or minimum width values. So let's apply a minimum width and let's say 240. So you notice once I've done that, we can see these elements, they're on the canvas and you see a min W240. And what that means is they will not shrink beyond that point. So now when I resize that main container, you'll see that it just kind of gives out. It's like, nope, 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 can't do that. You can't do that. It doesn't want me to do it. So that could be applied on anything. You notice that I applied it to the children just so you can see how that works. Let's say instead I want to apply it to the whole card. So I can select the card and I can apply a minimum width and I could say 240, right? So the minimum width of 240. But at any point you want to remove those values, you can just click on it again and remove the min and the max. So here, when I'm resizing it, let's make sure I apply it. Let's see. Oh, I'm sorry. That is yeah, that's the minimum width. So here we go. We're hitting the minimum width at that point. So max width, same difference. What I can do, can come here to the the width, apply a max width. I'm going to say, all right, we're not going to go any larger than 480. So we could see that here when I click on the width, you could see it visually represented on the canvas. The canvas is like, ooh, there's a max width of 480. So now if I try to extend it beyond that point, it won't let me. It just kind of hits this wall right here. How do you know what number of max or min W you should select? Are there some set of rules based on project? So one thing that I will tell you is when you're working with text, there is this intrinsic size called a measure. The measure is the width of text. Whenever you're working with text, you never want that measure to increase beyond approximately 75 characters. So you never want to read text that's super wide. And I usually use that as my ergonomic fact. If you've ever viewed Google, you notice that Google has kind of like a set width, no matter how much you extend your screen, right? And that's what's referred to as an ergonomic fact. Like people can't read and then move on to the next line if it extends beyond about 66 to 75 characters. I believe Google's ergonomic fact is about 66 characters. The way that I like to come up with that number is I'll usually take the font size and I multiply it by 32. So what that means is if I have a font size of 16, right? So let's say a font size of 16, and basically I will apply a maximum width of 16 times 32. So let's see if this is in an auto layout frame. I'm going to apply a max width of 16 times 32, and I believe that's about 512, right? And that's going to be the maximum width of a comfortable measure for text, right? So here, if this text is set to fill, right, that's gonna constrain it. Now, the reason I said associate it with your font size, because if your font size is larger, then that also grows with the font size. So like if it was 32, let me set a line height of like 36. Here we go. If I had larger font size, then my max width can be increased. So I would say 32 by 32. And that then becomes the new kind of like comfortable measure. Oops. Yeah, there we go. Phil. That becomes the new comfortable measure for my text. Now, I know that that's not a definitive answer, but it's one of my starting points. That's how I gate my text widths for comfortable reading. Excellent question, by the way, Christina. All right, so using wrap. Right now, we've been moving items, we stack them vertically and we stack them horizontally. So here, if I was to select all of these elements, I press Shift A being, the kind of like main thing of today's workshop. Shift A makes auto layout frames of your elements. So I selected them all. They're inside of here. I'm going to call this a tag cloud. Thank you, Alex. Shift A. So we have a tag cloud here. And you'll notice because I had two rows, that's this third option that we have, and it's called wrap. Right here we go. I'm going to take a screenshot of it, make it nice and big. So there we go. It's that wrap option. And what that does is based off of the width, it's going to change the available space that the elements that you have can fill it, right? So that's going to be great for tag clouds. That's going to be great for content in general. It's going to be great for some of the examples that we're going to work with in just a little bit. Now you have 2 dimensions of spacing. So I could change the spacing of 8 and a vertical spacing of 8. Let me make that a little bit bigger. There we go. I'm going to make that wider. I'm going to make that taller. So you can now control spacing on 2 dimensions for the wrapping. And you could even change, how they wrap. So they could wrap a line to the right, it could wrap a line to the left, etc. The way that this becomes helpful, and this is going to be one of the examples I have in just a bit, is that when you are working with content like cards, when you collaborate with min and max values and wrap, it's going to give you the ability to move from a horizontal layout to a vertical layout with the same component. So I'm going to show you how this works in a Pinterest-like card in an example. And we already talked about text truncation. Text truncation, when you select the text, this matters when the text field is set to fill container and the container doesn't have available space for the text to be viewed. You can come over here in a type settings and you could turn on text truncation. And what that means is now when that container gets smaller and there's not enough space for that text to be viewable, you'll see a little ellipses, and that just kind of gives indication that there's more text that's going to be there. So this is also a property that can be set on fields or cards or things when you're building out for the web. All right. So now that we've covered all of these main concepts, I have 3 little examples that we're going to make together. So we're going to start by reviewing the concept of making a button, and we're going to introduce the concept of component properties. So we are not just going to be making these on the canvas, we are going to make these elements reusable. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with the concept of a component is an element that can be reused. So there's a main component where you define what the thing is, and then there's instances of the component that you can then use in your designs. So designers commonly work in things called design systems, and a design system has a lot of these components within them that can then be reused. A lot of times there's parity with the development of a component in code and the representation of the component in Figma. So if I was to go to my assets panel here, you can see that there's actually a number of components that have been made in this file, and they can be brought in here and they can be modified. So I could say, coffee, 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 right? And I can update that component. So the component itself is a definition, and then those instances allow you to reuse it again and again. So that way, if there's any changes on, let's say, the main component, let's say I made those red, all of the instances follow suit. So this right here being the component definition, and any changes that I make in this component definition will then be reflected across all of its instances. And the instances themselves can have overrides. A lot of the ways I like to show this, if I was to draw a little arrow, right? So I'm going to draw a little arrow. I'm going to make this arrow a component. And so if I have a bunch of other ones here, when I go in and I edit this arrow, you could see that the instances, they follow the leader. And these instances can have overrides, such as the color of them. And you can modify, and you can see that these have changed. These have certain overrides, and the components themselves are the ones that kind of control them. So let me just delete that out, just to understand the concept. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to start at stage one. We're going to make the simplest of all simple components. We're going to make a hashtag component. So I'm going to draw a rectangle. I'm going to put in some text. I'm going to press the T key. I'm going to type in the word latte. And I'm also going to duplicate this. I'm going to hit Command D. And so we're going to have a hashtag. So Shift 3. We're going to have a hashtag, and we're going to have the text. The hashtag is not going to be, we're not going to make it super obvious to edit, but we want to be able to make this super obvious to edit. All right, so I'm going to select all three of these elements, and it doesn't need to be done this way. I just like to do it this way because it's a bit more visual. So I'm going to select all three elements. I'm going to press Shift A, and we're going to see that the auto layout has been added. I'm going to take a look over here in my layers panel, and you can see it's entitled Frame 14. I'm going to change this to hashtag button, and we're going to change its color and just make that, let's say, blue. I'm going to come over here to select the colors inside. I'm going to go to selection colors. I'm going to change those colors to white. I'm going to select the frame itself and apply a corner radius. Now, this corner radius, we're going to use a very large corner radius. I'm going to set 240, and that's going to give it this pill shape. So it's just going to make those edges round out as much as they can. Now we can test this out by just typing in some text here. You will see it grow. So once again, I just go in here, press the T key, right? The T key is the type tool. Just click all that text, and you can grow it. See how that works. I just hit undo. So now that I have this, I'm going to take a look at the padding. I'm going to make all my padding divisible by 8 or by 4s. Here we go. Let's set in a spacing of 4. So here in my auto layout pane, I can control certain things like the spacing between those two elements and the padding around them. Let's say I could bring this down even more. Let's go 12 and 16. Now let's say that as I'm making this component, I want to control the minimum width of this button. Let's say I want the button to be a little bit wider. I can come over here to the width, and I can add a minimum width to the button. And so right now it's about 83. I could set that minimum width to be, let's say 96. And you'll see we get a little extra space there. Let's make it more obvious. Let's set 120, right? So this is our minimum size. And let's say this content inside, what we want it to do is be a little bit better centered. So here I'm going to change the alignment to the center. And I'm going to change this text here to be hug contents, right? So now the way that this works is as I type, you'll see that the spacing on the sides is kind of remains stagnant because we have that minimum width on the container. And this will allow me to grow that out. So I see somebody's asking, why don't some fonts align to the middle when auto layout is applied? Different font designs have different baselines and X heights. What you may want to change is the line height that you're working with. Or here, you can also apply vertical trim. And what vertical trim will do is trim your text to that size. So what you're talking about, Natalia, is an issue with the line height and the baseline of the text. So right now I'm using whites, but if I use enter, you'll notice that each font has a slightly different definition. What you want to do is you want to control that line height value, or you want to go in and you want to set your vertical trim to clip to baseline. Okay. So you can see here, this will now grow. Now what we want to do, I'm just going to put this, latte art. I'm going to make this hashtag button. Now what we're going to do is we're going to make this into a component. So up here, you see this is the create component. It's going to be Alt, Control K, or Option, Command K. And that component will now show up in the assets panel. So there we are. There's our hashtag button. We're going to do one more thing to make this a bit more usable as a component. I'm just going to move this up here so you can see the frame around it. We're going to come over here to the properties. This is the component properties. Or what we could do is we could select the text itself. We're going to make a component property of the text. So then that way it's surfaced. So then that way it's easily editable. So here I'm going to select this, and you'll see these little icons. And these little icons allow you to create those properties. So I'm going to come up here. I'm going to create this text. I'm going to come down to the text. You see latte art, and here's the icon for create a text property. And we're going to call this, hashtag text. Right now the value is latte art. Let's create that property. So now anytime I have an instance of this, right, I got these three different hashtag buttons. When I select them over here in the design panel, you're going to see that it has a property for it. So I could say this is, coffee. This one I can select. I could change this to latte love. And you'll see that it then updates. So I don't have to go inside of the component and change that text. So here, hashtag text, let's say a whole lot of latte, right? And you'll notice because of that auto layout frame on that component, it's going to just grow to fill that space however I want it to be. Cool. So why would I put hug to the text and not fill container? The reason I would put hug to the text is because I want it to grow. Also, if there's no text, we have a minimum value on here, and we want that to center out. All right. So now if you wanted to make something like a hashtag cloud, right, we can take these instances that we're beginning to put in here, right? So we have these instances. And so I have like 1, 2, 3, right? Let's add in a few more, 4, 5, 6, right? I can select them all, right? I'm going to select them all. I'm going to press Shift A. So what we're going to do is we've wrapped all of these auto layout components into another auto layout frame, and we can control how they exist in this frame. So for example, I'm going to extend this out to the right little bit larger. So you could see this frame that we have here. And I want to show you all the alignment, what I like to call the alignment saltine. It's like a little cracker, call it the alignment cracker, right? And you can see how elements can be like realigned here as they relate to their container. So if I call this hug contents, hug contents, right? It's just going to go to one full line. But if I have a fixed value on the width set with the wrap property, right? That's going to allow these elements to wrap. Now let me change their spacing. So 8 and 8, right? So we're changing that spacing for these elements. Can't forget the fig jam with the alignment saltine. All right. So here we go. We can see all of these elements in here. Now, what I'm going to do, let's say if I want to make this into a component still, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just double check. Let's take a look at the layers. You see that all of these are just called hashtag button. So I'm going to show y'all a fun little trick. I'm going to select the whole thing. I'm going to press return. When I press return, it selects all of the inside ones. If I want to select the parent again, I can press shift return. It selects the parent again. But I want to select all those individual pieces. I'm going to hit Command R. I'm going to rename them. So I'm just going to call them tag and then apply numbers to them. So it's going to be tag 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and rename. So this way we can see them all named here and we can name that container and we can call that tag cloud. So we have our tag cloud. We have all of our inside elements, right? So once again, if you forgot how to rename them, press return. They're all selected. Command or Control R, right? It gives you the ability to rename them all. So when I select this and I'm going to make this a component. So we have our tag cloud component that we can then reuse. Let's say I want to surface all of those properties, all of those text properties in here. I can come in here into properties and I could say expose properties from nested instances. So here I can expose all of them. And now this component, when I create those instances, I could change all the names right here. So I could say like, hashtag coffee. I could be like hashtag coffee life. Here we go, like latte. And all of these properties can now be adjusted on that instance, right? So what we're doing is we're nesting, we're surfacing the properties of all those text bits right there, right? And we could change them all at this level over here on the right. So you see tag 6, tag 5, tag 4, and I could change that property. So coffee life, latte, coffee shop, and all of those are there. And this is going to grow and contract. Now, what we're ultimately building towards is this example. So this is like a Pinterest style card. So when you're building out your components, you start with the smaller pieces and then you kind of grow into like larger and larger things. So this is a Pinterest component that I built using all of the concepts that we covered today. So to change all of the names at once, it's Command R. So here, if I select them, Command R, it's going to bring up rename all 6 of those layers. Okay, so right here, this is a component that is using auto layout. It's using those min and those max values to construct all of the different pieces. All right, so I'm seeing Alex start 1 and 2. So this file is included. I just want to show you what is possible. So the way that this is constructed is just like this, right? You have all of these individual pieces. We can even use our tag cloud that we already created, right? And what you want is you're going to have a vertical alignment, right? You're going to have, let's say one, two, three. We're going to, let's say, group some stuff together. So this is going to be auto layout shift A. This is going to be auto layout shift A. This is these two are going to be auto layout shift A. These two are going to be auto layout shift A. And basically you can begin to construct them. Sometimes people say, all right, too much auto layout. But once you build a component and once it's working for you, right, then you're really getting somewhere. So I could say each one of these, right, I could put those together, shift A. I could control their spacing, 24. I can now bring this whole row, so 1, 2, 3, shift A, and I can reduce their space, right? So we have one side of the card, and then we have the other side of the card, shift A. And so we can apply a background fill. We can have additional spacing on the outside, 32, 32. And we're starting to build this out. Now we can even begin to think about the contents inside. So if there is a minimum width here, I can apply minimum width, let's say, 480. Let's say a minimum width here of 480. And both of these are set to fill container. And let's just set its contents as well to fill container. And its contents to fill container. Just set all these to fill container. And now we're starting to begin to construct this. So if this is set to wrap, now we can take those elements and they can wrap and they can create a more flexible component. So here we go. This is a content card. You can find this. You can deconstruct this in the file. Everything is named appropriately. So you could see the content. You could see the info. You could see the tag cloud. You can see let me name this properly again. This is user. And ultimately, what this means is when you come to design a website, um, those layouts can then be responsive and will grow and contract to fill your content. So we're running short on time. Let's answer some questions. Once again, thank you all for joining today. I have some questions here to answer. So when would we use constraints versus auto layout? Use constraints in conjunction with auto layout. So it's a concept I haven't talked too much about, but basically constraints basically tell elements within a frame how to resize. So these two elements are in a frame. I could say this element, I want it to follow the right or the left and the bottom. This element, I could say the right and the bottom. And that means that when this element resizes, those elements are going to constrain. So constraints, if you look up auto layout absolute positioning, you can use constraints within the auto layout to have things like a notification icon. So you throw a notification icon into an auto layout, and basically you tell and you instruct the object to be at the left and the right and the top. And so if you have a little notification, it will follow suit and it'll always be in the top right. What if components in the auto layout frame are also frames themselves versus components? They can be frames themselves. They don't need to be components. You can construct everything just as one component. The only reason you convert something to a component versus just a frame is because it's something that you're going to find yourself reusing or updating. You can strip it down and just have it be not as just be using auto layout frames entirely. Can we resize the auto layout components instances with being responsive? So it was what I was kind of demonstrating here, where here I have a layout frame, and in here I have a grid. The grid is made by using this layout grid. These two elements are currently in an auto layout frame. This is currently set to left and right constraints. And what that means is it's going to constrain to the grid lines. So then that way, this layout can then be responsive because they're constrained to the grid lines and it's using the rules set by the minimum value, right? So there's a minimum value associated on this image. So once that minimum value is hit, it's going to force this one to wrap onto the next line, giving you that layout. Now, if you were to go to Pinterest.com and pull up a card and you do that same behavior, this is exactly how that element is going to respond. So you're able to kind of create a similar behavior in a responsive environment using those minimum values and using the auto layout frames. Um, oh, if you want to change your default spacing, if you press command forward slash and type in nudge amount, so command P or command forward slash control forward slash or control P, you change your nudge amount. So my big nudge is 4. You could change that to 8. So your nudge amount is what's going to set your default padding sizes for your auto layout frames. Can the font auto change size depending on the size of the component? Not right now. What you can do is have a size scaling constraints, I believe, but I don't believe it will change the font size. Um, Getting a little too Shift A happy and end up making things unnecessarily complicated. So I'm using Shift A to build out components in a way that I want them to behave. You're absolutely right in that sometimes you can get a little bit too auto layout happy and it can be confusing for others on your team working with those elements. So it's a matter of understanding which is going to work the best and what's going to be most communicative. Since this workshop is focused on auto layout, you could tell that we're going to press Shift A lot. And then what would ideal circumstance for text to be truncated? Ideal circumstance for text to be truncated is if you have user generated text that may be going beyond a point. So if you have like 4 lines of text and 5 lines of text breaks the design and you want to have control over it, that's when you might set text truncation and or the opportunity to view more. So let's say it's a preview card and you're going to click on the card to expand it. Text truncation is ideal in that scenario. So then that way you are going to go look on more. All right, so next month's Figma workshop topic is going to be prototyping in Figma 102. I want to thank you all for joining me today. Once again, thanks for your patience and thanks for following along. Please watch the recording for additional support. Please download the community file at figma.com/@education. So then this way you can follow through. I know auto layout is a difficult concept to grasp, but it is a powerful tool that you can wield when working on your designs at scale. So thank you all. Remember, Figma and FigJam are free for students and educators. Head on over to figma.education to find out more, and feel free to check out our help docs if you're having difficulty verifying your education account. Thank you all.